A wannabe hero, Dad. Who do you think you are? A sneer echoed through the nearly empty dining car of the night train, venomous and condescending. The man in the expensive suit, the one who had just tripped a little boy, looked at Daniel Cross with the eyes of a predator watching a dying rabbit. He did not know that the rabbit he had just angered used to be an eagle, and he also did not know that the instinct to protect one's child is the most primal and terrifying weapon in the world. The T-800 night train glided silently through the fields, a colossal metal beast in the dark. The dining car was quiet, with only the yellow light casting a glow over empty tables and a few tired passengers. The rhythmic click-clack of the wheels on the tracks lulled the weary travelers to sleep. This was a precious moment for Daniel Cross. He sat back in his seat, arms crossed, quietly watching his son. 10-year-old Alex, with his brown hair and big, round eyes just like his mother's, was engrossed in his drawing. On a sheet of A4 paper, a giant robot named Guardian X was taking shape. It had square shoulders, large plasma cannons, and glowing red eyes. To Alex, Guardian X was more than just a drawing. It was a protective hero, a symbol of strength. He believed that as long as his dad had this drawing in his backpack, he would always be safe. At 38, Daniel looked older than his age. The sleepless nights and the burden of being a single father had etched wrinkles around his eyes. 3 years ago, on the T-618 train, his world had collapsed. His wife, Sarah, was gone forever. Since then, Daniel's life had revolved solely around his job as a mechanical engineer and his son, Alex. The boy was his anchor, the only light in his life of sorrow. He had once been a completely different person. As an airline security specialist, he was trained to spot danger from a distance, read people's thoughts through their gestures, and remain calm in any situation. But he had buried that person along with Sarah. He became a mechanic, living a quiet and secluded life. He believed it was the best way to protect Alex from the dangers of the world. But the world has dark corners that one cannot avoid, no matter how hard they try. In a corner of the dining car, a tense scene was unfolding. A young woman, about 30, was being cornered by 3 men in black suits. They didn't touch her, but the way they formed a circle around her showed she was their prey. Daniel recognized it instantly. His old instincts flared up. He noticed the familiar signs, a ready-to-act posture, one hand near an inside jacket pocket, and eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. These were professional skills. The woman, Maya Torres, tried to appear calm. She stood straight, chin slightly up, but her white-knuckled grip on her purse strap betrayed everything. Daniel could sense her fear. It spread through the air like a cold, metallic scent. The man in the middle, seemingly the leader, spoke. His voice was low and smooth as velvet, but it held a deadly threat. "Miss Torres, we can do this the easy way. Hand it over." "I don't know what you're talking about," Maya retorted. Her voice trembled slightly, but her eyes did not. They held a steady, defiant gaze. That look. It was painfully familiar. Sarah had the same look when she believed in something. A few nearby passengers glanced over, then quickly looked away. Another person put on headphones, continuing to scroll on their phone, feigning disinterest. The unspoken rule in public is, don't get involved in other people's business. Daniel told himself the same thing. He had Alex. His son's safety was the top priority. He just needed to stay silent and ignore everything. The second man, a hulking brute with a thick neck, let out a contemptuous laugh. "Don't play dumb, reporter. The memory card. Hand it over, or we'll have to search you. And believe me, you won't like the way we do it." The blatant threat made the air thick with tension. Daniel felt his blood begin to boil. He glanced at Alex. The boy was still absorbed in his world of robots, completely unaware. He had to protect that innocence. Silence was the safest choice. But then, something unexpected happened. Click. The green crayon, the color of Guardian X's eyes, slipped from Alex's hand and fell to the floor. It rolled a few times, as if with a will of its own, and stopped right next to the shiny leather shoe of the third man. the one who had been silent as a statue until now. "Oh, my crayon," Alex cried out, and without a moment's hesitation, he slid from his seat and toddled over to pick it up. He only saw the crayon, not the wolves surrounding it. The man, clearly annoyed by the unexpected interruption, scowled. He didn't bother to bend down. He didn't bother to speak. He just performed a small, casual, and cruel act. He used the tip of his shoe to give it a forceful kick. The crayon went flying, and Alex, who was bent over, was nudged in the shoulder by the shoe and stumbled, falling headfirst onto the train floor. The boy didn't cry. He just sat there, hand still outstretched toward the crayon, his face showing a look of utter bewilderment and hurt, as if he couldn't understand why a grown-up would do such a thing. In that moment, for Daniel, the world seemed to stop. The sound of the wheels, the air conditioning, the chatter, everything disappeared. All that remained was the image of his son sitting on the floor, small and helpless. The red line had not just been crossed, it had been pulverized. All the reasons to stay silent, all the fear, all the efforts to bury the past, turned to dust. Only one thing remained, purer and more powerful than anything in the world, a father's instinct. His eyes, which had been filled with worry, now took on the cold color of steel. His breathing became steady, slow. His body, even after so long without this kind of movement, still remembered. He slowly stood up. His movements were not rushed, but they radiated a terrifying resolve. He picked up a stainless steel food tray with half a sandwich and a glass of apple juice still on it, and walked toward the three men's table. They turned to look at him, their expressions full of annoyance. He said nothing. He simply placed the tray on their table. Clatter. The sharp, decisive sound rang out like a gunshot. The man who had shoved Alex turned back to him, sizing him up with a look of contempt. "What do you want? Got a problem?" Daniel looked him straight in the eyes, an empty, emotionless stare, yet one that sent a shiver down the man's spine. He spoke, his voice low and clear to every syllable, a voice that carried the weight of past storms. "You're on the wrong track, and you've picked the wrong target." Daniel's words echoed in the silent dining car, cold and full of defiance. The man, Marco, who had shoved Alex, smirked, a self-satisfied grin from someone who was used to solving everything with violence. "Oh, look what we have here," he growled, cracking his knuckles. "A wannabe hero, Dad. Who do you think you are to lecture me?" Marco lunged, fast and brutal. His large hand reached out, aiming straight for Daniel's collar, a familiar show of force meant to end the confrontation before it could even begin. The surrounding passengers held their breath, a few letting out small gasps of fear. Maya Torres squeezed her eyes shut. But Daniel didn't flinch. He stood perfectly still, his feet planted as if they had grown roots into the train floor. Time seemed to slow down. He didn't look at Marco's approaching hand, but into his eyes. He saw rage, contempt, and a touch of impatience. He was overconfident. First mistake. Just as Marco's fingers were a few centimeters from his collar, Daniel moved. His movement wasn't a punch or a kick. It was far more subtle and unexpected. He leaned to the left at a perfect angle, just enough to evade Marco's hand. At the same time, his right hand, which had been resting loosely on the stainless steel tray, subtly twisted at the wrist. The shiny metal surface caught the fluorescent light from the ceiling, turning into a dazzling, blade-sharp reflection that flashed directly into Marco's eyes. In a natural reflex, Marco's eyes clamped shut and his head jerked back. He was disoriented for one precious second. 1 second was more than enough. Daniel stepped forward, closing the distance. He didn't use his fists. He used the hard edge of the stainless steel tray, pressing it firmly against a pressure point located between two muscle fibers on Marco's wrist. It was a pressure point that security specialists were taught to neutralize an opponent without causing serious injury. An electric-like sensation of sharp, numbing pain shot through Marco's right arm. The hand that had been reaching for Daniel went limp and powerless, drooping like a broken branch. What the hell?" Marco stammered, trying to pull his arm back, but it no longer obeyed his command. He looked at Daniel with an expression of disbelief. The entire action happened in a flash, fast, clean, and almost silent. The surrounding passengers only saw Daniel slightly dodge, and then the big thug suddenly cried out and clutched his arm. A college student at a nearby table, who had started filming with his phone when Alex was pushed, shakily zoomed in on the close-up. The title "Boss Dad" on the T-800 train began to attract its first viewers. "You bastard!" The second man, the brute named Bruno, roared and lunged from the side, intending to overpower Daniel with brute force. Daniel didn't even need to look. He had felt Bruno's movement through the shift in the air, through the heavy thud of his footsteps on the floor. He pivoted on his heel, a smooth and efficient motion. His right hand reached out, not to attack, but to grab the nearest object. It was the navy blue silk tie of a dozing businessman in the seat next to him, his head slumped over a pile of papers on the table. In a single fluid motion, Daniel yanked the tie off. The sleeping man just grumbled in his dream, completely unaware he had just contributed to a fight. Daniel used the soft but strong silk strip like a whip, looping it around Bruno's swinging wrist, tightening it and yanking hard toward himself. Bruno, with all his body weight lunging forward, was suddenly thrown off balance. He was like a bull pulled off its feet, stumbling forward face first. Crash! His head hit the wooden table with a dull, resonant thud. He collapsed onto the floor, unconscious, 2 down, in less than 10 seconds. Now, all eyes were on the third man, the leader, Leon. The calm look he had at the beginning was gone. The confidence on his face had vanished, replaced by astonishment, caution, and a hint of undisguised fear. Leon realized his grave mistake. This man was no wannabe hero dad. He was a professional. Leon took a step back, his hand quickly diving into his suit jacket. When he pulled it out, in his hand was a small dagger with a black ceramic blade that didn't reflect light, the type of weapon designed to get past metal detectors. "Everybody stay still," Leon yelled, his voice a bit strained with tension. He waved the knife toward the cowering passengers. "Don't make me do this." Panic began to spread. A few people screamed, others scrambled to the back of the car, but Daniel stood his ground. He looked at the knife, then into Leon's panicked eyes. He was losing control. He would act on instinct, predictable. "Put the knife down," Daniel said, his voice level and devoid of fear. "Don't make this worse than it needs to be." "Shut up," Leon yelled, brandishing the knife at Daniel. He didn't charge blindly like his 2 accomplices, but was more cautious, keeping his distance. Daniel didn't back away. He reached into his jean pocket and took out a plastic key card used to open the train compartment doors. In this situation, it looked ridiculous, a flimsy piece of plastic against a sharp blade. Leon saw this and laughed, a strained, nervous laugh. "What are you gonna do? Swipe me to death?" He decided to attack. He lunged forward, aiming a stab straight at Daniel's abdomen. Daniel didn't dodge to the side. He did something no one expected. He stepped forward, lowered his center of gravity, almost into a lunge. He let the knife's blade graze his jacket sleeve. The distance between them was now extremely close. Daniel's left hand grabbed Leon's knife-wielding wrist, not to struggle, but to lock and direct it. At the same time, his right hand, the one holding the key card, went up. He didn't use it to stab or slash. He used the hard, thin edge of the plastic card to make a quick, forceful swipe across the back of Leon's knife-holding hand. Screech! A sharp sound rang out. The plastic edge scraped against the thin skin over the knuckles, an area packed with countless nerve endings. A sharp, searing pain shot up to Leon's brain, making his fingers spasm uncontrollably. The knife clattered to the floor with a loud clang. Before Leon could recover, Daniel had spun behind him, using his knee to strike the back of his leg and make him buckle. Finally, he quickly yanked a seatbelt from a nearby empty chair, and in a series of practiced, rapid movements, he secured the leader's hands to the metal frame of the seat. It was over. The entire dining car was silent, save for Leon's ragged breathing, Marco's moans, and the gentle snoring of the man who had lost his tie. The phone was still live streaming, with the number of viewers skyrocketing to an immense number. Daniel stood up straight, brushing off his jacket sleeve. He glanced at the three thugs lying on the floor, then at Maya Torres. She was still standing in the corner, but now her face was not one of fear, but of utter astonishment. She stared at Daniel, trying to comprehend what had just happened. An ordinary mechanical engineer couldn't have done these things. The way he moved, the way he used his surroundings, and the way he neutralized three trained men without breaking a sweat, these were the skills of a completely different person. She stammered, her voice still trembling. How did you? Daniel didn't answer her question. He didn't look at her. He just turned, walked to Alex, who was still standing beside his seat, eyes wide, looking at his dad as if he were a god who had just descended. He knelt down, placing both hands on his son's shoulders, checking him over carefully. "Are you really okay, Alex?" "I'm okay, Dad," Alex whispered. You're just like Guardian X." Daniel smiled, a tired but relieved smile. He hugged his son tightly, burying his face in the boy's hair, breathing in the familiar scent of his shampoo. In that moment, he wasn't a security expert, not an accidental hero. He was just a father. But just then, a hoarse, hateful voice came from the tied-up seat. Leon, even though he was restrained, let out a sinister laugh. You're good, very good, but you have no idea what you're up against. What's in that bag?" He couldn't finish his sentence, as Maya cut him off, her voice regaining the sharpness of a journalist. "It's evidence of the T-618 train accident, evidence against the Transcontinental Transport Corporation." The air in Daniel's lungs was sucked out. His ears went numb. That name, that number. It was like a key that unlocked the gate to a hell he had been trying to seal away for 3 years. T-618. The train that had taken his wife's life. The turning point of this chapter was no longer the action. It was a fact. A brutal truth that had just been thrown into the middle of the dining car, connecting everyone with an invisible thread of destiny. Daniel slowly raised his head, turning to look at Maya, and in his eyes, for the first time since his wife's death, a fire was lit. Not just instinct, but purpose. For the other passengers, the names Transcontinental and T-618 were just a part of the story they had just witnessed. But for Daniel, these names were like sharp shards of memory, suddenly resurfacing and piercing his heart. He slowly stood up, released Alex, and turned to face Maya. Everything around him blurred. The three thugs, the chattering passengers, the live-streaming phone, all became meaningless. Now, it was just him and the woman who held the secret to the greatest tragedy of his life. "What did you just say?" he asked, his voice hoarse, almost unrecognizable. It wasn't a question. It was a demand for confirmation, a desperate attempt to ensure he hadn't misheard. Maya looked him straight in the eyes. She saw not the coldness of a security expert, but a deep pain, a wound that had just been torn open. She understood everything. "The memory card," she said, her voice softening with empathy. "It contains internal documents, emails, technical reports, proving that Transcontinental intentionally used substandard rail materials to cut costs. They knew the risk, but they covered it up. The T-618 accident wasn't an accident." Each of her words was like a hammer blow, shattering the world Daniel had tried to rebuild from the ashes. For 3 years, he had lived with the belief that Sarah's death was a tragic accident, a random act of fate. He had wrestled with the question, why, and finally accepted that there was no answer. But now, the answer was right in front of him. His wife didn't die by fate. She was murdered by the greed of a giant corporation. "My wife," Daniel whispered, his voice cracking. He raised a hand to his face, trying to suppress an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel for 3 years. She was on that train. A heavy silence fell. Even the most curious passengers could feel the weight of this moment. They were not just witnessing a fight. They were witnessing a personal tragedy being laid bare. Leon, the leader tied to the chair, let out a cackle, a wild, gleeful laugh. "Oh, what a hell of a coincidence. It's destiny. Engineer, you thought you came here to save her. No, you came here to hear the final story about your wife." Daniel whirled around, his eyes blazing with a fiery hatred. If looks could kill, Leon would have died 1,000 times. "And you think it's over?" Leon continued, his voice full of defiance. "So what if you took down 3 of us? Transcontinental is an empire. You think you've won?" He leaned forward, whispering venomously. "The security on this train is one of ours. His name is Erickson, a dirty former cop. And he's on his way here, with a gun and the license to use it. A new threat, far more specific and deadly, had just been thrown out. No more daggers or fists. This was a gun, and it was in the hands of someone with authority on this very train." Real panic began to erupt. A few passengers screamed, scrambling toward the back of the car, creating a chaotic scene. But for Daniel, the threat had the opposite effect. It extinguished the burning hatred, replacing it with a cold, clear-headed calm. The personal pain had to be set aside. Now was the time for survival. He no longer hesitated. He was no longer a grieving husband or a normal engineer. He had reverted to the security specialist, Daniel Cross, the man he had tried so hard to bury. "Follow me, quickly," he commanded, his voice sharp and unyielding. He took Maya's hand with one hand and Alex's small hand with the other. "Dad, what's happening?" Alex asked, his voice full of fear. "It's okay, son," Daniel said, trying to keep his voice as calm as possible. "It's just a game. Now we're going to play hide and seek." He didn't run toward the cockpit. That was a trap. He knew Erickson would block that way. He led them running in the opposite direction, toward the back of the train, where there were freight cars and less frequented technical areas. "What are you going to do?" Maya asked, running and trying to keep up with his long strides. "Isolate the threat," Daniel replied curtly, his eyes constantly scanning the train cars, assessing everything: emergency exits, fire extinguishers, the position of passengers. "We can't fight a guy with a gun in an open space. We need to create a barrier." He led them through 2 chaotic passenger cars. He stopped abruptly at the door connecting Car 5 and Car 6. This was the spot he had chosen. "Alex, stay behind Miss Maya," he ordered his son, then opened his technical backpack. Inside were not guns or ammunition, but rolls of tape, pliers, screwdrivers, and a multi-tool kit. These were his weapons. He used a flathead screwdriver to pry open the small metal panel next to the door, revealing the technical box that controlled the electronic lock system. To anyone else, it was just a mess of tangled wires. But for an engineer like Daniel, it was as clear as a map. His fingers moved with expert skill, without a hint of hesitation. He didn't cut the wires, as that would trigger an alarm. He simply pulled out a few plugs, swapped their positions, and short-circuited a circuit with a small piece of copper wire. A soft beep sounded. The status light on the door turned from green to solid red. "Done," he said, closing the panel. "The electronic lock system for Car 5 has been disabled. The door won't open, even if Erickson uses a keycard or an employee's emergency code. He and his men are now locked in the front half of the train." He had split the train in 2, turning it into 2 separate zones. But that wasn't enough. He needed to take complete control of the situation. He needed to turn the panicked passengers into allies, or at least keep them from getting in the way. He glanced around and found what he needed: the train's intercom system, located in a red box labeled Emergency. He opened it, picked up the cold microphone. He took a deep breath, pushing all personal emotions down. His voice rang out through the speakers of the entire train. It was no longer the voice of a tired father or a grieving husband. It was the voice of a professional, a commander, calm, clear, and full of authority. Emergency announcement. "This is Daniel Cross, passenger in Car 7, former airline security specialist. There is an armed individual in car 5, and a security officer has been subdued. All staff are requested to stay in their current positions, lock the cockpit, and contact railway police at the next station. He paused for a second, letting the message sink in. Passengers, please remain calm, stay in your seats, and stay away from the windows. The situation is under control. An almost absolute silence fell over the train. The screaming stopped. The chaos subsided. Everyone, from traveling couples to tired businessmen, sat still. They didn't know who Daniel Cross was, but that voice gave them something more precious than gold: confidence. Confidence that someone was in control, someone who knew what he was doing. The entire train, from a place of chaos and fear, had become a silent fortress under his command. Daniel stood there, in the narrow corridor between the two train cars, his back leaning against the neutralized door. One hand was on Alex's shoulder to reassure the boy, the other still gripping the screwdriver. He knew Eriksson wouldn't give up. He would find a way to break through the door, or find another way. The real battle on this night train was just beginning. The T-800 train slowed down, the shriek of metal on the track sounding like a sigh of relief. Outside the window, the darkness was torn apart by a flashing forest of red and blue lights. Martin Station, which was normally a quiet stop, had now been transformed into a temporary command center. Dozens of police cars, ambulances, and SWAT vehicles had surrounded the train like an iron cordon. On the platform, figures in tactical gear, armed and ready, were in position. When the train came to a complete stop, a suffocating silence settled. Every passenger held their breath. Daniel stood near the door, one hand still on Alex's shoulder, shielding the boy. He could feel his son's heart pounding. "It's okay, son," he whispered. "It's almost over." The train doors hissed open. Immediately, a team of special forces in black gear stormed in, moving with professional silence. They didn't have to break down a door or confront Eriksson. Daniel's plan had worked perfectly. The rogue security officer and the fixers had been completely isolated and were arrested cleanly without a single shot being fired. A senior police officer, a man with salt and pepper hair and a seasoned face, approached Daniel and Maya. "Mr. Cross, Miss Torres, I'm Inspector Miller. Everyone is safe now." Daniel nodded, the tension that had been building for hours finally beginning to dissipate, leaving behind a feeling of complete exhaustion. As they were escorted off the train, another world of chaos greeted them. Hundreds of reporters, journalists, and cameramen were waiting behind the police barricade. Camera flashes erupted like a storm, and microphones were aimed at them like gun barrels. Shouts of "Mr. Cross, Miss Torres" came from all directions, forming a jarring symphony. The students' live stream video, now reshared by the world's largest news agencies, had turned the story on the night train into a global phenomenon. Daniel Cross, from an anonymous mechanical engineer, had become the dad on the T-800 train, and reluctant hero, a symbol of courage. He hated it. He didn't want to be the center of attention. He just wanted to get his son out of this nightmare. He instinctively pulled Alex closer, using his body to shield the boy from the media storm. Inspector Miller tried to clear a path for them. "Please stand back. Let them through." Maya, with a journalist's instinct, knew this was the decisive moment. She clutched her purse. Inside was the memory card, the evidence that could bring down an empire. She was about to hand it to the inspector, to let the law do the rest. But before she could, Daniel gently placed a hand on her arm, stopping her. "Wait," he said, his voice low and quiet, just loud enough for her to hear. Maya turned, looking at him with a puzzled expression. In front of hundreds of cameras pointed at him, Daniel said nothing. He quietly knelt on one knee to be at eye level with his son. He opened Alex's backpack. Among the books and crayon box, he carefully took out an A4 sheet of paper that had been carefully colored. It was the drawing of Guardian X, the giant robot, a symbol of protection, the guardian angel, in a child's innocent world. With the rough fingers of a mechanic, yet with an unexpected tenderness, Daniel slowly wrapped the drawing paper around the small memory card Maya was holding. He didn't use tape, just simply rolled it up so that the image of the giant robot with its fiery eyes enveloped the fragile piece of evidence. That action, a simple, silent, and symbolic gesture, brought the noisy crowd to a halt. The shouting died down, and all that remained was the continuous clicking of cameras trying to capture this powerful moment. An image that would go down in history, the pure innocence of a child, expressed through childlike drawings, wrapping around and protecting a brutal truth. That was how Daniel honored his late wife. That was how he affirmed that this fight, above all, was to protect the future of his son and of all other children. He stood up, handing the wrapped gift back to Maya. Their eyes met. Without words, they understood everything. She nodded, then solemnly handed it to Inspector Miller. But the crowd of reporters wouldn't give up easily. They had the image. Now they needed a quote. An especially aggressive female reporter, who had somehow slipped through the security barrier, shoved a microphone almost into Daniel's face. Mr. Cross, why did you do this? Do you have a message you want to send? How does it feel to be a hero right now? The questions were rushed, insensitive. Daniel squeezed Alex's hand. He could have just walked away. He didn't owe them an explanation. But then he saw the other faces in the crowd, ordinary people holding up their phones, their eyes filled with admiration and hope. He realized he couldn't stay silent. He had to speak, not for the media, but for them, for ordinary people like him. He raised his head, looking directly into one of the cameras for the first time, its red light, like an eye scrutinizing his soul. 3 years ago, he began, his voice clear and sharp, cutting through all the noise. A faulty railway track took my wife from me. He paused for a moment, letting the statement sink in. He didn't say an accident. He said a faulty railway track. A raw truth. Tonight, he continued, his eyes unwavering, I just made sure the track of justice was set straight. He gently squeezed Alex's hand within his own, a loving grip, so that no child has to lose their mother like my son did. That was all. Not a single boast, not a hint of arrogance, just the simple and powerful declaration of a husband, a father. The female reporter seemed stunned, unable to ask another question. The entire platform was engulfed in a moving silence. Daniel, without another word, walked away with Inspector Miller and Alex, leaving behind a crowd that was slowly beginning to realize they had not only witnessed an act of heroism, but also the birth of a legacy. The media storm after the fateful night on the T-800 train was bigger than anything Daniel could have imagined. He became the face of every newspaper, the main subject of every news broadcast. The hero dad, the courageous engineer, the man who fixed justice. These glamorous titles were assigned to him, but they felt as alien as if they were about someone else. Morning talk shows, publishers, Hollywood film studios. They all came calling, waving checks with unbelievable numbers. They wanted to buy his story, to turn his pain and courage into an entertainment product. Daniel refused them all. He turned off his phone, stopped reading newspapers and watching TV. He just wanted to return to a normal life, something that now seemed impossible. He went back to the mechanical workshop, but his colleagues now looked at him with a different gaze, a mixture of respect and distance. The casual chats about sports or the weather were replaced by awkward silences. He took Alex to school, but other parents whispered and pointed behind his back. He had saved many people, but he had lost his precious anonymity. Meanwhile, the track of justice he had set straight began to take effect. The memory card, protected by the Guardian X drawing, opened up a Pandora's box for the Transcontinental Corporation. The scandal rocked the nation. A series of high-ranking executives were prosecuted for manslaughter, fraud, and covering up crimes. Internal emails and documents revealed a network of systemic corruption and irresponsibility where profit was placed above human lives. The families of the T-618 accident victims, after 3 years of struggling in silence and despair, finally found their voice and justice. Sarah Cross's name, along with others, was mentioned not as a statistic, but as a painful reminder of the price of greed. Daniel followed it all through brief headlines online. He felt no triumph or joy, only an emptiness, a feeling that justice, however late, could not bring Sarah back. But when he looked at Alex, he knew that everything he had done was worth it. He had ensured that his son's mother's death was not in vain. Time passed. The media storm eventually subsided, moving on to new, sensational stories. Daniel's life slowly returned to its orbit, though it could never be completely the same. He was still the father who picked his son up from school every day, still the mechanic who fixed broken machines. He was no longer a completely silent man, but a silent hero, a man who carried a story, a legacy. A few months later, on a crisp autumn evening, Daniel and Alex were on a train again, not for work or to flee. They were going on a vacation, a real trip, just the two of them, to a small coastal town that Sarah had always wanted to visit. As the train began to roll out of the familiar station, Alex took a sketchbook and a box of crayons from his backpack. He said nothing, just busily drew, his little tongue sticking out in concentration. Daniel smiled, a genuine, unforced smile. He felt a peace he hadn't had in a very long time. A little while later, Alex finished his work and held it up for his dad to see. It wasn't Guardian X. On the page, next to a giant robot that looked friendlier than before, was a drawing of a small man. The man had no armor or weapons, just wore a normal jacket and jeans. He was standing, one hand on his hip, the other placed on the robot's shoulder, as if they were friends, teammates. Below the drawing, Alex had carefully written the words, Dad and Guardian X, the protective squad. Daniel felt a lump in his throat. He realized that for Alex, he no longer needed the protection of a giant robot, because his dad was stronger than any robot. He carefully took the drawing, looking at it for a long time. "It's beautiful, son," he said, his voice a little hoarse. "This is your best drawing." He folded the paper and tucked it into the inner pocket of his jacket, right next to his heart. That night, after Alex was fast asleep on the top bunk of the train compartment, Daniel couldn't sleep. He stood by the window, watching the scenery of villages pass by in the night. He thought about that fateful night. He knew he hadn't just fixed a dangerous situation or sought justice for his wife. That night, he had fixed something inside himself, something that had been broken since Sarah's death. He had found his purpose again, not as a security expert, but as a father. He didn't just fix machines. He fixed what was broken. The train whistle sounded ahead, a long and clear sound that tore through the stillness of the night. But this time, it no longer carried the tone of tragedy or loss. It was no longer an echo of a painful past. It was the sound of a new journey, a peaceful journey he had fought for with his wits, courage, and love. A new track, leading to a brighter future for him and his son. And this time, he knew for sure it was headed in the right direction.